Well, today I'm going to talk about, in this third session, I'm going to talk about the hot potato of responsibility. Do you like responsibility? Some people would say we're in the mess that we're in America because of lack of responsibility. Nobody wants it. Nobody wants to take it. And perhaps those that are taking it, it's in the wrong hands. I don't know. That's why I keep believing that when we put things in the hands of Jesus, it's going to eventually get in the right hands. So we're talking about the hot potato of responsibility. You know that game, don't you? You fire up the potato and you pass it around the circle, and when it goes off, if you have it in your hands, then you're out of the circle. Well, responsibility can be kind of like that, depending upon how you view it. And so we're going to talk about that today. One of the things that I learned is that you can't have success without some level of responsibility. People say they want to be successful. They like to do things that are amazing and just, own the world and manage the world. Well, let me tell you, you can't have success unless you're willing to accept responsibility. But lots of times people are told, I just want my rights and I want my freedom. And so if you just want your rights and your freedoms, nobody's telling those people that are saying, I want my rights and my freedom, with that becomes responsibility. Are you willing to accept the responsibility that comes with your rights and your freedoms? But nobody's telling the folks that. It's all about rights. It's all about freedoms. And so today we're going to wade into this because in reality, really, how we handle responsibility is made at home. Think about it for a few moments. How did your parents, when you grew up, how did they handle responsibility? Did they give responsibility? Did they not give responsibility? Were you dumped on too early? Were you dumped on too late? You see, responsibility is one of those hot potatoes that at times we learn things and we learn how to do things and take responsibility, and yet we don't stop and think, how did that happen? How did that take place in my life? Well, we're going to jump right in today and talk about accepting or rejecting responsibility as made at home. That's where we're going to start. Acceptance or rejection of responsibility is made at home. Psalm 78, 3 through 5. Actually, if you read Psalm 78, 1 through 8, you get the fuller picture. But I've just pulled out a couple of phrases from those verses that says this: what we have heard and known, what our fathers have told us, we will tell the next generation. The writer there in Psalm says we have a responsibility as moms and dads to share with the next generation what we have learned about the Lord. And that's that whole psalm is talking about the responsibility that we have as parents to tell the next generation about what God has done in our life. My children have three children. My children have experienced things of the Lord in their teenage years that Wanda and I didn't know about or experience until we got to our late 30s and early 40s. But they've already experienced the level that we did when we were in our 30s and 40s. They already are experiencing that in their teens. You see, that's the way it should be. But we made the decision that we were not going to live or pastor a mediocre church. We were going to pastor a church that was alive. And sometimes the church wasn't alive as we thought it should be. And so we would take our children to places that God was manifesting His power so that they could see it firsthand rather than just hear a testimony or read it in a book. Now, hearing a testimony is great. I love that. And reading it in a book. But sometimes the things weren't happening at the level that we believed they could. And so therefore we took our children out to places that it was happening so that they could experience it firsthand. And as a result, they captured things in their teens that we didn't get till we were in our 40s. You see, we have a responsibility as moms and dads and as a church to pass on to the next generation coming up the things of the Lord and not shrink back, but to let them know. Responsibility, let's just define it here for a moment. It's kind of a generic definition. And I'll say this, something to be done to a certain level of expectation. How would you rate that definition? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, right? Pretty generic. Something to be done at a certain level of expectation. Maybe we could even take the word itself and twist it around. Do you have the ability to respond? Responsibility. Do you have the ability to respond? Whatever it may be, that would be responsibility. Now, again, when we grow up, it's either accepted. When you accept responsibility, it may not start out that way, but if you never get beyond just the task done, it'll be limited. But when you recognize and even share with your family and friends, wait a minute, this task is only a small part of a much bigger picture. And without this task being done, it's going to make it hard on the others that are trying to do their part. Let me get back to the example. Accepted. See a bigger picture than just the task being done. You see, that's what we need to communicate to the next generation. We all have a part in this. God says we all have a gift. We all have an area that we can help out. And so when everybody does their part, then to realize that it's going to be a fuller picture. Everybody's going to be blessed at a level. But when we have some people that are going all out and we have the people that are slacking. You ever try to do a task and have some slackers? In college, I mean, we had group projects that we had to do. You remember those group projects? 2 or 3 people did it and 3 or 4 of them slacked. Didn't that make you happy? Made you mad, didn't it? Then everybody got the same grade? That really ticks you off then. When you have some people trying to dive in and other people slacking. No, we all need to accept responsibility. And when we do that, begin to paint a picture. It's not just about this task. It's about all the tasks that are going on that make all things beautiful. Then we have the rejected responsibility. If somebody rejects responsibility, says, I don't want to do anything. I just want to grow up and be a slacker. Oh, wow. Isn't that great? I just want to grow up and slack. Then they're rejecting responsibility. What's happening? It's really a limited view of how it's only affecting you. It's really a self-centered view. It's just affecting me. I don't want to do it, so therefore I'm not going to do it. As I mentioned in the first message, I believe I'm the last of 6 children, and being the last, actually I did have a brother that was born 2 years after me, and he died in childbirth, so I'll see him in heaven. Look forward to meeting him in heaven. But I was the last of 6 children, and my father had read the parenting books and had listened to everybody else and said, your last one's going to be spoiled. And so he made a decision. He didn't tell me. He made a decision. And he said, I plan to give my last child responsibility at a young age so that they don't grow up spoiled. And that's what he did. When I was probably 3 years old, one of my earliest memories, I was driving a tractor. And I was too illiterate to know that the steering wheel connected to the direction of the tractor. I was sitting on a seat. It was in grandma gear. I had a hold of the wheel. And my brother or dad or whoever was off to the side was telling me which way to turn the wheel. And I would just do whatever they told me. They said, turn the wheel the other way. That's what I understood, so I'd turn it that way. And then the tractor would start veering to the left, and they would say, Bobby, turn the wheel back the other way, and I would turn it back the other way. That's all I knew, but it worked. And they were doing whatever they needed to do, and I was accepting responsibility young. Nothing crashed. So he had this theory that if he gave me responsibility young, that I wouldn't grow up spoiled. And I don't know, I'll let Wanda and the rest of you decide whether it worked or not. But I had chores to do. I had records to keep. I had responsibilities that most teenagers didn't have. And I was expected to do it, and I did it because that's what was given me. And yet I realized that as my parents grew older and decisions need to be made about the family, oftentimes that falls to the oldest child and maybe some young me, but it seemed that when decisions needed to be made in the family, they would always come to me. And they'd say, Bobby, you need to help us through this. The youngest, not the oldest or somebody in between. You need to help us through that. You need to walk mom and dad through this. You need to help. It fell on the youngest. I don't know why, but it just did. And so I give that example of just personally growing up and saying that that when we accept responsibility and do it in the right way, that God grows us through that. And we end up then doing things that perhaps we never imagined. So let's look at number 2, how responsibility is best transferred at home. You have your Bibles, turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6. How is responsibility best transferred at home? Do you yell it out? Or do you get a whiteboard? Or do you sit at the table? Let's look at what God says in His Word, how to transfer responsibility. Deuteronomy 6:3 says this, Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. Verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commands that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols around your hands and bind them on your foreheads and write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that He swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you a land with large, flourishing cities you did not build, and houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, and wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. When you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. See, we learned in this series of passages how to transfer responsibility over to the next generation. And the first thing that I want to highlight is start young. That's what happened to me. Start young. And let them help you. That's what it says in verse 7. It says, impress them on your children. Actually, if you dig into that word, it actually means, like each of us have an imprint on our finger. You get your finger printed. It says, imprint them. Imprint them. Impress kind of sounds like, you're doing it for show. No, that's not an erroneous way of interpretation. It's imprint them. Let them help you. I heard one father say, I think it was about a 2-3-year-old, said, help me take out the trash. And this little 3-year-old just had his hand on the bag. That's it. And Daddy was taking out the trash, but the 2-year-old had his hand on the bag. And he came back in, Mommy, I helped Daddy take out the trash. Now, did he do anything? In his mind, he thought he did. Did he really do anything? Not really. But that father started young, teaching responsibility. The next thing is model proper attitudes. Responsibility is caught more than taught. Responsibility is caught more than it is taught. Verse 5 and 6. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commands are to be upon your heart. Who's God talking to in those two verses? Is He talking to the parents or is He talking to the children? He's talking to the parents. You see, if you don't know the background of Deuteronomy, when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, there were moms and dads and children. And they got to the place where the moms and dads didn't have enough faith to go into the promised land. And so God said, we're going to wander around this wilderness for 40 years till the moms and dads die off. And those that were 20 years old and younger, they are now in their 40s and 60s. They're the moms and dads. And so God is speaking to a new generation in Deuteronomy. That's why you have the repeat. He said the same things in earlier books, but he comes back in Deuteronomy and repeats the same thing because he's speaking to a new set of moms and dads, and he's speaking to a new set of children. And so he says, moms and dads, I want you to love the Lord with all of your heart and mind and soul and strength. Love the Lord. You see, responsibility is caught more than it is taught. When we love the Lord, we're doing it for somebody bigger than us. Standards, the third bullet point I have. Standards, when standards aren't upheld, discuss why. Discuss why. That's what it says. It says impress on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you what is that? Sit at home around the table. I hope you have table time. When you walk along the road, what is that? Driving in the car. When you lie down at night, what is that? Bedtime prayers. When you get up in the morning, what is that? Send out prayers. Talk about it. Why didn't you get this done? What's the problem? Let's discuss it. What are you doing? You're actually putting that child in a place of becoming a success, because nobody that has success doesn't have responsibility. Everybody that has success carries responsibility and does it well. So when you give your child responsibility young, you're actually putting them into position to be a success and teaching them how to shoulder responsibility. Discuss standards. When standards aren't upheld, discuss why. Here's one that maybe could get some kickback. At least we'll have some conversations. Avoid rewards as the primary means to affirm them. The primary means. It doesn't mean that you can't go get an ice cream cone if the house is picked up. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying if that's all the children get is rewards for what they do, then when they get out in life, they're expecting the kudos to come, and they won't do anything unless the kudos are there. And that's not life. We had a side business, and some of the things that we did in the side business, we do it at home. And I remember one of the kids said, "Hey, do I get paid at home because I'm doing the same thing in the business as at home?" And I said, "No. This is what we do as a family. Nobody's getting paid for anything. This is what we do as a family. That's different, but we do this as a family." And then provide enough routine to allow them to take initiative. Provide enough routine to allow them to take initiative. Verse 12, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You see, routine. If Saturday is cleaning day, then the child gets that in there. Oh, I got to clean on Saturdays. I don't know what day you picked. If we eat dinner, then the dishes need to be done. The house needs to be clean. If you get into enough routine, then the child begins to go, oh yeah, that's what we need to do, because family works together to do that. You see, all of my siblings were workers. Nobody was slackers. And so that's how Dad and Mom raised us. Nobody was there slacking while the other was working. We were all working together, doing different things. The responsibility you take, here's the goal. The responsibility you take adds value to a greater good, bigger than anyone involved. Maybe that's said in a complicated way, but I think I emphasize that further. To understand that when you take responsibility for you and what you have to do, you're actually blessing a bigger picture going on. And that needs to be instilled in our children as well. Taking proper responsibility. Last month I attended a drug coalition meeting in Winchester, and I try to go from time to time to keep up to date. And it's kind of, I became acquainted, heard this couple share, that really they got responsibility dumped on them too soon. And maybe some of you can relate to that. You got dumped on too soon. Too much, too soon. And if you've been in a situation where you get dumped on too much too soon, it'll either make you or it'll break you. One of the two. It really will. And I've known people in both cases. In this particular case, it made both of them. The wife's name was Tina, and her husband's name was Rodney. And they actually have a ministry today that is trying to help teenagers that are at home where their parents are being irresponsible. And they began to share their story briefly. Tina said when she was 8 years old, that her mom would come home from work. Dad wasn't in the house. I don't know why. Her mom came home from work. Her mom would start drinking from the time she came home from work. She would lose her faculties at times. Tina, at 18 years old, would clean her up, put her mom in bed, get her up the next morning, and send her to work at 8 years old. She said, I didn't know if I would make it. But listen to this, educators, perk up. She said, I had a teacher in school that picked me out and said, Tina, you're going to graduate from high school and you're going to go further. The encouragement of that teacher in school, she didn't have it at home, but she got it at school. She said, I graduated from high school and I went to college as well and graduated. Her husband, it was 15 when both of his parents got caught for selling drugs. Both his parents got put into prison at the same time. He said, I immediately became the parent. I forged checks. I went to the grocery store. I made food. I did everything I could to keep the family together. He said, my biggest fear was to have social services or the school find out and tear the family apart. He said, I saw my friends, and they would be taken out of the house, kicking and screaming, put into a car, never to be seen any longer. He said, I was so fearful that I rose up and became the parent of that family because I didn't want anybody to know that we didn't have mom and dad at home. And I was going to take care of them to make sure that we stayed together as a family. You see, that experience, we go, oh, how did they survive? That experience actually made them. But sometimes we can get dumped on too early and too quick and actually destroy us. The best illustration I have is as a farm dog I had. His name was Jess. He was a border collie. He was registered. He was bred to be a working dog. I got him and I was so excited because I was going to teach him how to herd cattle so I wouldn't have to do as much work. I was making this dog be responsible so I wouldn't have to. But I took him out one day into the field, and he was not much bigger than holding in both of my hands. And I remember putting him down where some cows were. And cows were not used to dogs. It's just something that they both have to get used to one another and decide who's boss. But I put him down, and the cows came up to look around. And one of them said, I'm done with this. And she ran into him and mauled him. I rescued him. But that one incident psychologically damaged him. He grew up. He had the pedigree. He had the working parents. He had everything to be a success. But he would always stay on the other side of the fence and just look at the cattle. And he would never get in the ring again because he was damaged psychologically from having too much responsibility too soon. And that can happen to you and I. We need to get time to have Jesus sort that all out so that we can be restored and carry what God has given us to carry. Tough places. And so, as we talk about carrying responsibility, let's just talk about that for a few moments. Number 3, what happens when too much responsibility is taken or maybe given when parents or when kids are parenting parents? What do we do with that? What happens to us in life? Let's just talk about that for a few moments. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 4 and 5, it says, be sure to do what you should, and you won't need to compare yourself with anybody else. For we are each responsible for our own conduct. That's what it says in Galatians 4 and 5. Now, earlier in that chapter, it says that we should look after the interests of other people. And then it says that we should be responsible for our own self. What's he saying? It says that we should be mature enough to realize that sometimes people need help, but also don't cross the line that what they should be responsible for personally that they're able to do. Don't do it for them. You know, we live today in a work culture, and I've listened to some of you, and you know, at work, You're supposed to be Superman and Wonder Woman. I mean, you're supposed to do more with less and work longer and be more productive. And I mean, that's going on in the workplace all across America. And that's a tough place to be in. Really tough. I understand that. But the question is, in our off time, when we walk out that door, and maybe some people don't have the ability to walk out the door and leave it behind, but when you walk out that door, what do you do in your personal time? What do you do in the time that you manage? You see, if we let things build up too long, too much responsibility too long, there's probably some things that will take place in our life. These are not rocket science. It's just reality. Number one is we'll quit. We'll just quit. It can happen in the church. Too much responsibility too long. We just quit because we've reached our breaking point. We quit jobs. We quit parenting. We quit coaching. We quit serving. Just because we've had too much responsibility, or maybe we've gotten too much responsibility, we just quit. I was listening to a pastor speak about burnout this week, and he said that he had planted a very successful church, and it went really well, and he got burned out. So he took 9 months off, sabbatical. And he said, the first 8 months I was trying to figure out how to get a different job. Just trying to figure out. He just said, my best solution was that I thought the best job out there was in the technology department at Walmart. And he said, the reason why, he said, because I'd been there enough to know that you didn't have to know anything about electronics to work in the electronics department at Walmart. And you just had to enjoy your job. And he thought, I can do that. Well, he made it through, and he's back in ministry today, and the Lord helped him through that. But sometimes we just quit, don't we? The second thing is we fail to no return. We snap under pressure. Maybe you've been around somebody, or maybe you look back in your past and you say, you know what, I was just so worn out and so wiped out, I snapped under pressure. I did something, and I don't even know if I can recover from that, what I just did. In fact, I heard another story about two different guys that worked on two different church staff. And so the one just got so worn out, he had an affair while working on church staff. And so the other guy went over and asked his friend, why did you have an affair? This is his answer. He said, it was easier to have an affair than to quit my job. That's messed up thinking, isn't it? It was easier to have an affair to fail to a point of no return. In his mind, he thought that was easier than to quit. You see what happens to us when we get under too much pressure too long? We absolutely messes up our thinking and messes up our decisions and messes up our actions. Number 3, we survive, or we just survive. What does it mean to survive? It means that we stay in position but with no passion. Have you done that? So you can do that for a certain period of time, but long term that'll kill you. In fact, I think that's the Christian cardinal sin. I don't know what that is. Is that Catholic mixed into Christian there? Christian cardinal sin, to stay at a place of survival, meaning you're in the position but you have no passion. Because that's not representative of Christians. That's not representative of Christ. That we stay in a place and just hold that position and have no passion for why we're in that position. I don't think that's godly. I think that we can do that for a short period of time. But when you do that for a long period of time, I don't believe that's representative of Jesus. We've got to figure out what we're doing wrong and get our passion back. Because that's how He's called us to live and how He's called us to be. So what do? God wants us to thrive in responsibility. That's what He wants. He wants us to thrive. Are you thriving in the responsibility that you have? I'm not hearing too many answers. I'm hearing a lot of people thinking. Colossians 3:22 and 23 says this, whatever you do, I don't know what you do, all of you all, some of you. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men. Let's talk about that verse for a little bit. It requires that mom and dad start thinking, what are we teaching? What are we demonstrating to our children? Are we working at this marriage? Are we working at parenting with all of our heart? Or are we kind of each doing our own thing and hope it works out? You see, sometimes we have to stop and say, wait a minute. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart. Work at it with all your heart. And so, as we look at that, it means that sometimes we honestly have to quit or transition to something else because we're carrying too much responsibility. I don't think we ever quit. I think we transition. But we do learn how to say no. And sometimes I think that as we walk down through life, we have to reach the place to evaluate, wait a minute, all this that I'm carrying, I want to quit. I might make a decision that I will fail and I'll regret later, or I'm just surviving. I don't like that. I want to thrive in the responsibility that God has given me. The workplace says you can do 40 things and you can do 40 things well. No, you can't. Except women can. Wanda and I, a couple of years ago, Wanda and I were driving and she asked me a question and I was giving her an answer and I was into my answer. I mean, it was really, really good, except I was slowing down and missed a turn. She said, what are you doing? I said, I can't drive and talk at the same time. And then what happens, you multitask and then you end up living or doing things off of other people's shoulds. Have you had that happen? You should do this. You should do that. You should stop doing that. You ever had people try to should you? People shoulding on you? Got to be careful with that one. And it gets worked into your life and you end up shoulding on yourself. Oh. How did we get here? I should get back on track. Colossians 3:22. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, not for men. See, if you want to thrive in responsibility, there's basically two actions that you need to learn. And I'm going to grab this. I just grabbed it. It was in my office, and this is a tripod. And that is, if to get back to accepting the responsibility that you need a reference point. You need to find a reference point. And then after you have that reference point, then you have to make small corrections along the way. You see, I've got a reference point on this tripod, but if I don't make corrections along the way, it's going to fall over. And my job, my responsibility is to keep it upright. And I've got to have, if I'm looking over there talking to somebody else or trying to think what I'm going to say next, I'll drop it. But my responsibility is to keep this tripod straight up. And in order to do that, I have to make small corrections along the way. Not big ones, but just small ones in order to keep it upright. In the same way with our lives. We're carrying responsibility, and sometimes we've lost the reference point. We've lost why we're doing it. We've lost the bigger picture of who we're affecting because we're not holding up our end of the bargain. And we end up dropping the very thing that the Lord has given us to carry because we've lost our reference point and we've not made course correction. You think about driving a car and you got a steering wheel. What are you doing? You got a reference point of the road in front of you, but you're making course corrections all the time. Just small ones, but they're important ones. And if you don't make small corrections along the way, then you'll end up in a ditch, somebody else's bumper, and that's not cool. Well, Jesus has the answer for us. If we find ourselves burned up, burned out, ready to quit, just surviving? He's got the answer for us, and it's in Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Many of you have probably heard this before, but some things we need to be brought back to our memory. Jesus said, I've got the remedy for you. And here's what it is. He says, come to me. Jesus is talking. Don't go to your counselor. Don't go to your pastor. Don't go to your... I'm not saying that they might not have some good things to say, but Jesus says, come to me. All you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. That's what Jesus said. I didn't make this stuff up. He said, I'll put my yoke upon you, I'll connect you, and I will teach you. You can learn from me. Because I'm gentle and I'm humble at heart. I have your best interest in mind. And you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I love the Message translation. Same verses. Jesus said, are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on responsibility? That's my word. Jesus says, come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me. Work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn how to live freely and lightly. What a great translation. Some of you are at that place, need to look that up and read it, pray it. Ask the Lord begin to teach you. You see, when we receive responsibility, oftentimes later in life we need a lot of wisdom. And Jesus can provide that. He's not wanting us to give up prematurely. He's not wanting us just to survive. He's not wanting us to make decisions that would put us out of where He's taken us. I'm not saying that you don't stop a job or don't. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you find your place where too much responsibility is caving in on you, that you stop and say, Jesus, you and I got to take some time together. We got to get some time away. You and I have to figure this thing out. Because, you see, in the adjustment, Colossians says, do everything as unto the Lord with all your heart. With all your heart, it says, everything unto the Lord. See, your focal point is the Lord. I'm doing everything for the Lord. And not as unto man. You see, if we don't make adjustments in our life, we'll end up basically living our life from everybody else's shoulds, instead of what the Lord says that we need to. So we need to adjust out of the shoulds of others and say, Lord, what have you called me to? Come to me. Oh, you're weary. That's what Jesus said. That's our reference point. That's our place of correction. Let's pray. Lord, today as we talk about how we learned responsibility at home, even as we looked last week into the example of how you grew up, Lord, you accepted responsibility at home and you grew and then you moved out at age 30. And Lord, it usually happens a lot sooner for us in our culture. But Father, I pray that you would show us how to receive and how to thrive in the responsibility that you've given us. And I pray, Lord, that there's those here this morning that have said, I'm so overloaded, I want to quit. I'm so overloaded, I feel like that I'm going to make decisions that will just burn a bridge rather than make a decision that would prosper me. Maybe you're thinking, I'm just surviving. I don't have any passion. I'm just in a position. God, show us your way out. Jesus, you said you had a way out. You said, come to me. That's the starting place. And I pray, Lord, that we'd even start right now, that we would just come to you. Stand with me. You can begin to talk to the Lord in your seats. We have folks here scheduled to pray. If you would come in front and join me. This is a place where the Lord begins to say, each one of us has a load to carry. But Jesus says, the one that I give you, it is especially fitted for you. Uniquely you, the responsibility. All of us have different responsibilities. Some people can carry heavy, heavy loads because they've learned how to do it. Other people can only carry light loads. It's not something we can impose on other. We have to go to the Lord. And when we get it for Him, then we can do it with all of our might. Are you there? Maybe you feel like that dog, Jess, that got mauled early. Or something happened in ministry and life and mauled you, and all you're doing is just sitting on the side of the fence, just looking through, wondering if you could get back into the arena again. The answer is yes. Jesus says, come to me. Come to me. Start. I'll teach you how to get it right this time. Teach you. Let's worship Him. Let's let Him speak to us and encourage us.